Book 1, Chapter 51 of Resurrection. Nekhludoff drove that day straight from Maslennikoff's to the prison, and went to the inspector's lodging, which he now knew. He was again struck by the sounds of the same piano of inferior quality, but this time it was not a rhapsody that was being played, but exercises by Clementi, again with the same vigour, distinctness, and quickness. The servant with the bandaged eye said the inspector was in, and showed Nekhludoff to a small drawing-room, in which there stood a sofa, and in front of it a table with a large lamp, which stood on a piece of crochet-work, and the paper shade of which was burnt on one side. The chief inspector entered, with his usual sad and weary look. "Take a seat, please. What is it you want?" he said, buttoning up the middle button of his uniform. "I have just been to the vice-governor's, and got this order from him. I should like to see the prisoner Maslova." "Markova?" asked the inspector, unable to hear distinctly because of the music. "Maslova." "Well, yes." The inspector got up and went to the door whence proceeded Clementi's roulades. "Mary, can't you stop just a minute?" he said, in a voice that showed that this music was the bane of his life. "One can't hear a word." The piano was silent, but one could hear the sound of reluctant steps, and some one looked in at the door. The inspector seemed to feel eased by the interval of silence, lit a thick cigarette of weak tobacco, and offered one to Nekhludoff. Nekhludoff refused. "What I want is to see Maslova." "Oh, yes, that can be managed." "Now then, what do you want?" he said, addressing a little girl of 5 or 6, who came into the room and walked up to her father with her head turned towards Nekhludoff and her eyes fixed on him. "There now, you'll fall down," said the inspector, smiling, as the little girl ran up to him, and, not looking where she was going, caught her foot in a little rug. "Well, then, if I may, I shall go." "It's not very convenient to see Maslova to-day," said the inspector. "How's that?" "Well, you know, it's all your own fault," said the inspector, with a slight smile. "Prince, give her no money into her hands. If you like, give it to me. I will keep it for her. You see, you gave her some money yesterday. She got some spirits. It's an evil we cannot manage to root out. And to-day she is quite tipsy, even violent." "Can this be true?" "Oh, yes, it is. I have even been obliged to have recourse to severe measures, and to put her into a separate cell. She is a quiet woman in an ordinary way, but please do not give her any money. These people are so—" What had happened the day before came vividly back to Nekhludoff's mind, and again he was seized with fear. "And Dukova, a political prisoner, might I see her?" "Yes, if you like," said the inspector. He embraced the little girl, who was still looking at Nekhludoff, got up, and tenderly motioning her aside, went into the anteroom. Hardly had he got into the overcoat which the maid helped him to put on, and before he had reached the door, the distinct sounds of Clementi's roulades again began. "She entered the conservatoire, but there is such disorder there. She has a great gift," said the inspector, as they went down the stairs. "She means to play at concerts." The inspector and Nekhludoff arrived at the prison. The gates were instantly opened as they appeared. The jailers, with their fingers lifted to their caps, followed the inspector with their eyes. 4 men, with their heads half-shaved, who were carrying tubs filled with something, cringed when they saw the inspector. One of them frowned angrily, his black eyes glaring. "Of course a talent like that must be developed. It would not do to bury it. But in a small lodging, you know, it is rather hard." The inspector went on with the conversation, taking no notice of the prisoners. Who is it you want to see?" "Dukova." "Dukova. Oh, she's in the tower. You'll have to wait a little," he said. "Might I not, meanwhile, see the prisoners Menshoff, mother and son, who are accused of incendiarism?" Oh, yes, cell 21. Yes, they can be sent for. But might I not see Menshoff in his cell? Oh, you'll find the waiting-room more pleasant. No, I should prefer the cell. It is more interesting. Well, you have found something to be interested in. Here the assistant, a smartly dressed officer, entered the side door. Here, see the prince into Menshoff's cell, number 21, said the inspector to his assistant, and then take him to the office, and I'll go and call— What's her name? Vera Dukova. The inspector's assistant was young, with dyed moustaches, and diffusing the smell of eau de cologne. This way, please, he said to Nekhludoff, with a pleasant smile. Our establishment interests you? Yes, it does interest me. And besides, I look upon it as a duty to help a man who I heard was confined here, though innocent. The assistant shrugged his shoulders. Yes, that may happen, he said quietly, politely stepping aside to let the visitor enter the stinking corridor first. But it also happens that they lie. Here we are. The doors of the cells were opened, and some of the prisoners were in the corridor. The assistant nodded slightly to the jailers, and cast a side glance at the prisoners, who, keeping close to the wall, crept back to their cells, or stood like soldiers, with their arms at their sides, following the official with their eyes. After passing through one corridor, the assistant showed Nekhludoff into another to the left, separated from the first by an iron door. This corridor was darker, and smelt even worse than the first. The corridor had doors on both sides, with little holes in them about an inch in diameter. There was only an old jailer with an unpleasant face in this corridor. "Where is Menshoff?" asked the inspector's assistant. "The 8th cell to the left." "And these, are they occupied?" said Nekhludoff. "Yes, all but one." End of Book 1, Chapter 51.
Book 1, Chapter 52 of Resurrection. "May I look in?" asked Nekhludoff. "Oh, certainly," answered the assistant, smiling, and turned to the jailer with some question. Nekhludoff looked into one of the little holes, and saw a tall young man pacing up and down the cell. When the man heard someone at the door, he looked up with a frown, but continued walking up and down. Nekhludoff looked into another hole. His eye met another large eye, looking out of the hole at him, and he quickly stepped aside. In the 3rd cell he saw a very small man asleep on the bed, covered, head and all, with his prison cloak. In the 4th a broad-faced man was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his head low down. At the sound of footsteps this man raised his head and looked up. His face, especially his large eyes, bore the expression of hopeless dejection. One could see that it did not even interest him to know who was looking into his cell. Whoever it might be, he evidently hoped for nothing good from him. Nekhludoff was seized with dread, and went to Menshoff's cell, number 21, without stopping to look through any more holes. The jailer unlocked the door and opened it. A young man, with long neck, well-developed muscles, a small head, and kind round eyes, stood by the bed, hastily putting on his cloak, and looking at the newcomers with a frightened face. Nekhludoff was especially struck by the kind, round eyes that were throwing frightened and inquiring glances in terms at him, at the jailer, and at the assistant, and back again. "Here's a gentleman wants to inquire into your affair." "Thank you kindly." "Yes, I was told about you," Nekhludoff said, going through the cell up to the dirty grated window, "and I should like to hear all about it from yourself." Menshoff also came up to the window, and at once started telling his story, at first looking shyly at the inspector's assistant, but growing gradually bolder. When the assistant left the cell, and went into the corridor to give some order, the man grew quite bold. The story was told with the accent and in the manner common to a most ordinary good peasant lad. To hear it told by a prisoner dressed in this degrading clothing, and inside a prison, seemed very strange to Nekhludoff. Nekhludoff listened, and at the same time kept looking around him. At the low bedstead with its straw mattress, the window in the dirty, damp wall, and the piteous face and form of this unfortunate, disfigured peasant in his prison cloak and shoes, and he felt sadder and sadder, and would have liked not to believe what this good-natured fellow was saying. It seemed too dreadful to think that men could do such a thing as to take a man, dress him in convict clothes, and put him in this horrible place without any reason, only because he himself had been injured. And yet the thought that this seemingly true story, told with such a good-natured expression on his face, might be an invention and a lie was still more dreadful. This was the story. The village public housekeeper had enticed the young fellow's wife. He tried to get justice by all sorts of means, but everywhere the public housekeeper managed to bribe the officials and was acquitted. Once he took his wife back by force, but she ran away next day. Then he came to demand her back, but though he saw her when he came in, the public housekeeper told him she was not there, and ordered him to go away. He would not go, so the public housekeeper and his servant beat him so that they drew blood. The next day a fire broke out in the public house, and the young man and his mother were accused of having set the house on fire. He had not set it on fire, but was visiting a friend at the time. And it is true that you did not set it on fire? It never entered my head to do it, sir. It must be my enemy that did it himself. They say he had only just insured it. Then they said it was mother and I that did it, and that we had threatened him. It was true I once did go for him. My heart couldn't stand it any longer. Can this be true? God is my witness it is true. Oh, sir, be so good. And Nekhludoff had some difficulty to prevent him from bowing down to the ground. You see I am perishing without any reason. His face quivered, and he turned up the sleeve of his cloak and began to cry, wiping the tears with the sleeve of his dirty shirt. Are you ready? Asked the assistant. Yes. Well, cheer up. We will consult a good lawyer, and will do what we can, said Nekhludoff, and went out. Menshov stood close to the door, so that the jailer knocked him in shutting it, and while the jailer was locking it, he remained looking out through the little hole. End of Book 1, Chapter 52.